Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back. Hope you had an absolutely delicious, yummy lunch. I certainly enjoyed mine. Hello, my name is Catherine, and I'm the Director of Income Generation at Hospice UK, and I'll be chairing the session this afternoon. Now to our fourth plenary. Should hospices be more like businesses? I'd argue we were businesses already. But we shall explore that together with a fantastic array of two very wonderful speakers. Firstly, I'd like to introduce to you Eamon O'Neill. Eamon is currently the Chief Executive Officer of St Anne's Hospice in Greater Manchester, a position he's held just since July. But interestingly, he was actually chair of St Anne's for 3 years prior to that. And most of Eamon's career has been in media and broadcasting, where he's been managing editor of the Manchester Evening News, he's been group managing editor of the Trinity Mirror's regional titles, and also stints in TV, at ITV, and at Granada, where he was also a TV presenter. So we're very honoured to have Eamon with us today, and I think that perspective he will bring, having been chief exec, chair, and a career in business and media, will be very interesting. Our second speaker, I'm delighted to welcome David Picton. David Picton is the Chief Sustainability Officer of Carilion. Hospice UK have been working with Carilion now for just over a year. And I have to say, they really are leading the way when it comes to their sustainability programme. And David's actually in charge of that, so he's very important. David has an illustrious career too. He's had senior positions at Sky, at Motorola, and I found out just recently a 20-year military career as a RAF wing commander. So again, I think bringing a really interesting perspective. To serve as a basis for discussion and to really get our thinking and creative juices flowing and hopefully to provoke some thought and reaction in all of us. We're going to actually show a clip from a TED talk by US social entrepreneur, some of you may have heard of, Dan Pallotta. He has quite an interesting viewpoint. He believes that charities really need to invest much more in marketing and fundraising, and that we really should be challenging the perceptions about charity spend. We talk a lot about cost, and really we should be talking about investment. So I think it's a very interesting view, particularly given where we are at the moment in, well, certainly the last 18 months, being in a challenging landscape and under such media scrutiny as well. Once we've seen the clip, I'll then invite Eamon and then David to give their reaction and their comments and their perspective, and then we'll open it out to the floor, and that's where you guys come in. So have your questions at the ready. If we could play the clip, please. Thank you.
The market for love. It is the market for all those people for whom there is no other market coming. And so if we really want, like Buckminster Fuller said, a world that works for everyone, with no one and nothing left out, then the nonprofit sector has to be a serious part of the conversation. But it doesn't seem to be working. Why have our breast cancer charities not come close to finding a cure for breast cancer, or our homeless charities not come close to ending homelessness in any major city? Why has poverty remained stuck at 12% of the US population for 40 years? And the answer is, these social problems are massive in scale, our organizations are tiny up against them, and we have a belief system that keeps them tiny. We have two rule books. We have one for the nonprofit sector and one for the rest of the economic world. It's an apartheid, and it discriminates against the for-profit sector in 5 different areas, the first being compensation. So in the for-profit sector, the more value you produce, the more money you can make. But we don't like nonprofits to use money to incentivize people to produce more in social service. We have a visceral reaction to the idea that anyone would make very much money helping other people. Interesting that we don't have a visceral reaction to the notion that people would make a lot of money not helping other people. You know, You want to make $50 million selling violent video games to kids, go for it. We'll put you on the cover of Wired magazine, but you want to make $500,000 trying to cure kids of malaria, and you're considered a parasite yourself. And we think of this as our system of ethics, but what we don't realize is that this system has a powerful side effect, which is it gives a really stark, mutually exclusive choice between doing very well for yourself and your family or doing good for the world to the brightest minds coming out of our best universities, and sends tens of thousands of people who could make a huge difference in the nonprofit sector marching every year directly into the for-profit sector because they're not willing to make that kind of lifelong economic sacrifice. Business Week did a survey, looked at the compensation packages for MBAs 10 years out of business school. And the median compensation for a Stanford MBA with bonus at the age of 38 was $400,000. Meanwhile, for the same year, the average salary for the CEO of a $5 million plus medical charity in the US was $232,000, and for a hunger charity, $84,000. Now, there's no way you're going to get a lot of people with $400,000 talent to make a $316,000 sacrifice every year to become the CEO of a hunger charity. Some people say, well, that's just because those MBA types are greedy. Not necessarily. They might be smart. It's cheaper for that person to donate $100,000 every year to the hunger charity, save $50,000 on their taxes, so still be roughly $270,000 a year ahead of the game, now be called a philanthropist because they donated $100,000 to charity, probably sit on the board of the hunger charity, indeed probably supervise the poor SOB who decided to become the CEO of the hunger charity, and have a lifetime of this kind of power and influence and popular praise still ahead of them. The second area of discrimination is advertising and marketing. So we tell the for-profit sector, spend, spend, spend on advertising until the last dollar no longer produces a penny of value. But we don't like to see our donations spent on advertising and charity. Our attitude is, well, look, if you can get the advertising donated, at 4 o'clock in the morning, I'm okay with that. But I don't want my donation spent on advertising. I want it to go to the needy. As if the money invested in advertising could not bring in dramatically greater sums of money to serve the needy. In the 1990s, my company created the long-distance AIDS ride bicycle journeys and 60-mile-long breast cancer 3-day walks. And over the course of 9 years, we had 182,000 ordinary heroes participate, and they raised a total of $581 million. They raised more money more quickly for these causes than any events in history, all based on the idea that people are weary of being asked to do the least they can possibly do. People are yearning to measure the full distance of their potential on behalf of the causes that they care about deeply. But they have to be asked. We got that many people to participate by buying full-page ads in the New York Times and the Boston Globe and primetime radio and TV advertising. Do you know how many people we would have gotten if we put up flyers in the laundromat? Charitable giving has remained stuck in the U.S. at 2% of GDP ever since we started measuring it in the 1970s. That's an important fact because it tells us that in 40 years, the nonprofit sector has not been able to wrestle any market share away from the for-profit sector. And if you think about it, how could one sector possibly take market share away from another sector if it isn't really allowed to market? And if we tell the consumer brands, you may advertise all the benefits of your product, but we tell charities, you cannot advertise all the good that you do, where do we think the consumer dollars are going to flow? The third area of discrimination is the taking of risk in pursuit of new ideas for generating revenue. So Disney can make a new $200 million movie that flops, and nobody calls the Attorney General. But you do a little $1 million community fundraiser for the poor, and it doesn't produce a 75% profit to the cause in the first 12 months, and your character's called into question. So nonprofits are really reluctant to attempt any brave, daring, giant-scale new fundraising endeavors for fear that if the thing fails, their reputations will be dragged through the mud. Well, you and I know when you prohibit failure, you kill innovation. If you kill innovation in fundraising, you can't raise more revenue. If you can't raise more revenue, you can't grow. And if you can't grow, you can't possibly solve large social problems. The fourth area is time. So Amazon went for 6 years without returning any profit to investors, and people had patience. They knew that there was a long-term objective down the line of building market dominance. But if a nonprofit organization ever had a dream of building magnificent scale that required that for 6 years no money was going to go to the needy, it was all going to be invested in building this scale, we would expect a crucifixion. And the last area is profit itself. So the for-profit sector can pay people profits in order to attract their capital for their new ideas, but you can't pay profits in a non-profit sector. So the for-profit sector has a lock on the multi-trillion-dollar capital markets, and the non-profit sector is starved for growth and risk and idea capital. Well, you put those 5 things together, you can't use money to lure talent away from the for-profit sector. You can't advertise on anywhere near the scale the for-profit sector does for new customers. You can't take the kinds of risks in pursuit of those customers that the for-profit sector takes. You don't have the same amount of time to find them as the for-profit sector, and you don't have a stock market with which to fund any of this, even if you could do it in the first place. And you've just put the nonprofit sector at an extreme disadvantage to the for-profit sector on every level. If we have any doubts about the effects of this separate rulebook, this statistic is sobering. From 1970 to 2009, the number of nonprofits that really grew, that crossed the $50 million annual revenue barrier, is 144. In the same time, the number of for-profits that crossed it is 46,136. So we're dealing with social problems that are massive in scale, and our organizations can't generate any scale. All of the scale goes to Coca-Cola and Burger King. So why do we think this way?
Thank you. If you'll join me in welcoming Eamon O'Neill to the floor. Eamon.
Hello, my name is Eamon. And as a Mancunian, I'm delighted to be in Liverpool. Those of you who are not from around here might not understand the rivalry between Manchester and Liverpool. It goes back to the days when some entrepreneurs built the Manchester Ship Canal in order that the ships could go straight into the biggest inland dock in the country and avoid paying taxes to Liverpool docks, and we've hated each other ever since. However, I have benefited from the Liverpool hospitality because I was last-minute booking in a hotel, so I was in one down the road and got the last room available, and it was tiny. There wasn't room to swing a cat, but after a couple of minutes, a guy came up and brought me a much smaller cat. So, and that's what the Scousers can do for you. Partnerships, collaboration, the two words are interchangeable. We've used the word collaboration a lot over the last day and a half, and we're going to probably overuse it today, but it's so important. I must say, though, of course, excuse me, that standing up in front of people is not necessarily new to everybody, but however many times you do it, you've still got to make sure your brain and your mouth are in sync, and that often can trip you up. And an example of that only last week was my wife Sheila, when I got up and I asked her, I said, "What would you like for breakfast, darling?" And I know she was trying to say, "I'll have a boiled egg and some soldiers, please, dear." And what she actually said was, "You've ruined my life, you misery." So I'm hoping that brain and mouth are all in sync today. So as Catherine says, I have come to the hospice world by a fairly unusual route, I suppose you would say. I'm not the only one, though, because I've met a couple of colleagues outside in the Galleria. One of them has come to the hospice movement from the police. He was in the serious crime squad and got thrown out for laughing. And there was a finance director I met who was out of work for a while because she was a shepherd in Brixton. So we haven't all come through the NHS, and I think that is a good thing. My journey started, as many have in terms of connection with hospice care, with members of my family being looked after at St Anne's Hospice and then ultimately passing away at St Anne's. So like many other family members, I became a supporter there and then, did a bit of fundraising and lent any support I could. Because I was a television and radio presenter at the time, the hospice thought it might be a good idea to have me as a patron so that I could help spread the word. Years later then, joined the trustees as chairman, and now, as Catherine said, my anniversary, 4-month anniversary tomorrow as chief executive. So I've seen it from that throughout that whole journey. Very different perspectives. And I don't want to go into it in too much detail now because that's not what this talk is about. But, you know, hats off to all you chairs and huge hats off to all you chief execs because it just keeps coming in waves. And as chairman, you know, you take the position of supporting the trustees about the good governance and so on. And now, operationally, the deep dive uncovers all sorts of things. And sometimes it can uncover some practices that we're a little embarrassed about. And that touches on the TED Talk that we just had a glimpse of. So I did work in the media, radio, television, newspapers and online. And most recently, as Catherine said, managing editor of Trinity Mirror's regional titles, which included the Liverpool Echo, actually, and the Manchester Evening News. But it's a privilege now to be chief executive of St Anne's. And I say to many, I wasn't looking for a chief executive role. I wasn't scouring the Sunday papers, seeing where the chief executive roles might be turning up. It's because it's St Anne's. It's because it's the hospice. It's because of what it does. And a hospice is so very different from media PLCs. Actually, though, is it? The underlying principles of running a complex organisation remain the same, and there are even dynamics which might sound familiar. For example, in a newspaper group, there's inevitable tension between the ad sales guys in the commercial department and the journalists in editorial. You wouldn't have pages to publish your stories if we didn't sell the adverts. Well, there would be no pages to sell adverts onto if we didn't write the stories. That's a regular conversation that goes on between editorial and commercial. And I'll leave it up to you to decide whether that has echoes of clinical versus fundraising in your organisation. And of course, both sides are right and clearly interdependent. So we saw Dan Polotter there on the screen. One of his sound bites, he's got some fantastic sound bites. He's an amazing presenter and he's got some really sharp ideas. I would urge you to see the whole TED Talk because he does go on to say one of his companies went bust overnight as well. So it's not all good news, but one of his sound bites is, philanthropy is the market for love. And he's right to a point, but philanthropy isn't the only market for love, is it? We are part of that market, but are we philanthropic? We benefit from philanthropy, but we're not necessarily essentially ourselves philanthropic, I would suggest. We're benevolent. We're compassionate, we're inclusive, we're all the things that we say we are in our published values. But we're all part of the market for love. Elsewhere in his talk, when you get to see all of it, he asks this question, which is really interesting. How do you monetize laughter? So I wondered if he was here today, would he be asking us, how do you monetize palliative and end-of-life care? It's a really interesting question. He tells us that we should change the way we think about not-for-profit organisations and that social business needs aggressive marketing. So while we can applaud Dan for his entrepreneurial talents, his successes, and some of his motives, we can't just transpose his American model into the UK, of course. Logic may tell us that a significant increase in investment in fundraising is sensible. But here in the UK, as you know, culturally, that investment will be seen often as excessive cost. Even though we talk about return on investment, it's perceived as cost and sometimes unnecessary costs. The generous public sometimes perceive it as reckless, and they still want to know that the highest percentage possible of the pound they give you is going to the services which you're delivering. We're not ready culturally, unfortunately, in many ways in this country, to hike it up in the same way as Dan suggests. However, that does give us a challenge. How do we attract talent? How do you attract the top talent into your organisation without spending? You'll be familiar with the Daily Mail being obsessed with the charity sector, the charity's running costs, particularly the senior management salaries. And I think you in the sector, I was on the other side of the fence at the time, you in the sector have done very well batting all that back since the beginning of the year. Pesky journalists, eh? But we shouldn't be embarrassed by it. Of course, the retired person who donates £8 a month through a direct debit, who suddenly finds out that there are a number of noughts at the end of a chief exec's salary, is going to be unhappy. But across the whole of our organisations, whatever the role, we have to attract the best talent. And that can be difficult in this sector. And personally, I think, as the new boy, that whole NHS agenda for change salary structure hasn't helped us. But back to the question, should hospices be more like businesses? I think it's fairly obvious, as Catherine said earlier, we are businesses, of course. We're already businesses. However, not all have necessarily fully emerged from the comfort of the community's arms, which have enfolded them for decades. And we will all be at different places in the journey to embrace business principles. But we are businesses, of course. To plagiarise for a moment and probably slightly misquote a line which belongs to David Houston, who's the Chief Executive of Trinity Hospice in Blackpool, are we, or do we want to be, Ocado or the farmer trying to sell milk to the supermarkets? David's here today, so if you want to know what that means, ask him afterwards. But I think it means about ambition and where we sit in the delivery chain. We're no longer, as an organisation, as a sector, the benign mom-and-pop cottage hospital type of place at the end of a leafy country lane. We are leaders in a sophisticated specialist field. But we are fighting, aren't we? We're fighting tooth and nail to survive, thrive, and, as many others have said over the past couple of days, remain relevant. And it starts within the four walls of the hospice, obviously. As a matter of course, we should robustly be addressing, for example, areas which can scupper effective business planning, unpalatable things like performance management, sickness absence management among the staff. We've all got values which we've published, and I think we should all have behaviours which we publish, if we haven't already, behind those values. The specific behaviours that explain how we can identify whether we're living the values also help, not just with the tricky issues of performance management and PDRs and so on, but they also encourage the cultural journey that we need to be on to constantly provide the very best care for patients and families. Good business behaviours in our context, will also underpin employee loyalty and commitment, enhance integrity and reputation, which in turn, as you know as well as I do, leads to even more donors and onwards around that virtuous circle. And while good business leaders always ask this question, how do I make sure my employees do the work properly and do the right thing? That question must be posed in the context of our ethos and our good, trusting relationships with staff, patients, families, and the community. And it probably goes without saying, but I am going to say it anyway, working practices and culture are typically influenced by the visible presence and personal behaviours and attitudes of the leaders within the organisation. That can't be overstated. And I don't suppose we can talk about business without mentioning the P word, profit. What's the point of being in business if you're not going to make a profit? But I would suggest the definition of profit for us is slightly different. I suggest our profit is the amount and quality of care we provide for patients and families. It's both our currency and our profit. And then David will talk in more detail about sustainability, but sustainability is a key area for us to consider. One thing we must do as a sector is collaborate more, strategic, meaningful collaboration. In Greater Manchester, we're dealing with the devolution of the health and social care budget, which at £6 billion is already falling short of what it needs to be. And as we're not part of the NHS, we weren't in scope as the Memorandum of Understanding documents were being prepared, so we weren't invited to comment. I heard the same principle just espoused in another session earlier on. But following some concerted agitation from us, in the beginning from St Anne's Hospice and Bolton Hospice, working together, we've now got a seat round the various tables. And that was followed by the Greater Manchester Hospices working as an alliance to make our collective voice heard. Recognition is dawning on the snappily entitled GMHSCP, Greater Manchester Health and Social Care Partnership, that they can't deliver all of their plans without us. So now a small group, led by Lee Valance, Chief Executive at Bolton, and Rachel McMillan, St Anne's Director of Clinical Services and Deputy Chief Executive, are drawing together on behalf of the Greater Manchester Hospices a document which will outline the standards for palliative and end-of-life care. They'll make their way through the locality boards and hopefully they'll end up as part of the agreed HSCP protocols. And we wouldn't be at this stage if we didn't pool our business knowledge, our expertise and work in partnership with each other. And it also requires the buy-in from the board, and our board is very supportive of it. As a general point, the logical step next from close collaboration is sharing management and executive functions, and following that, mergers, which I'm not going to talk specifically about in case fights do break out in the auditorium. When I was back at Granada Television, I joined it when it was still owned by a family. The Bernstein family owned it. And each office had a picture of Barnum in it, P.T. Barnum. And that was to remind the programme makers that we were in the entertainment world. Soon after I joined, in 2000 actually, Charles Allen became the chief executive, now Baron Allen of Kensington. And he pulled us all together. All the Barnum pictures were taken down. And Charles Allen reminded us that our main objective was not to entertain, educate or inform. Our main objective was to sell advertising. And he was derided by the traditionalists for that, and John Cleese sent him a very rude letter. And it was a little extreme possibly, but he made the point, and it marked the beginning of mergers and takeovers, which Tracy is very familiar with, leading to what we now have, ITV PLC. And I know that not everybody sees that as progress, but what is unarguable in that sector is that if change had not taken place, if mergers had not happened, collaboration hadn't been meaningful and deep, the smaller TV stations that you remember, Anglia TV in Norwich, for example, Border up in the Lakes, just would not have been able to survive on their own in a world of changing technology and economics. And the same can be said, without labouring the point, of the Liverpool Echo, our neighbours here, the Manchester Evening News, the Newcastle Chronicle, all the other titles. They're dealing with the most challenging time in their history. They're not dominant anymore. Print sales are declining everywhere. Digital delivery of content is king. So they've all had to diversify. They've all had to change their business models and work together to provide a critical mass. They can't fight the tide of technological progress in isolation. Obviously, there's a fair amount of collaboration already in our sector. It's happening at various levels. I'm not for a minute suggesting that the hospice movement is in extreme imminent danger. Tracy O'Keefe is probably in the room, MD of HQP, 60 members now, hospices working as a partnership social enterprise for procurement and data sharing and so on, and I'm sure she'd love to talk to you afterwards if you're not already a member. So there's collaboration outside of the four walls. But what I am suggesting is that not only must we run our hospices like businesses now, we must also think like business people when looking to the future. We must ask ourselves whether scale will give us comfort and protection. We must accept that significant collaboration is hard work, and hospices tend not to work at any great speed. And we must acknowledge that the world is moving on with great speed. Unitary boards are being talked about. Virgin Care is in Wiltshire and has got its eyes set on the West Midlands. STPs, MCPs, PACs, currencies, tariffs, they're all coming our way. We can't stem the tide, so let's get our business heads on and tackle it all together as a sector. But finally, back to Dan Pallotta. I was an aside, by the way. In his home country comes a cautionary tale, even before Trump was elected. Hospices, you probably know this, began being treated as big businesses with extremely worrying consequences. In the USA, hospice care has seen a dramatic change in growth over the past 15 years, from a collection of small religious-affiliated entities into a multi-billion-dollar industry that has quadrupled since the year 2000. Stats from Medicare suggest that around half the people insured with Medicare who die in a hospice. But we must beware, because in the last 10 years, the US government has accused almost all of the for-profit hospices of billing fraud. Over a 3-year period, more than half of all US hospices were cited for violations of one type or another, mainly care-related, families claiming their loved ones were under-medicated or over-medicated. So I don't agree with everything Dan Pallotta spouts, but I do think he's right when he says charities are sometimes petrified of trying bold new endeavours and ideas. Well, I think, and I put it to you, that we owe it to our people, our partners, to instill bold ambition into our DNA, because if we don't, we won't move forward and we'll never reach the full potential. We will never strive enough to reach our potential. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Eamon. Bold ambition into our DNA. What a fantastic place to end. I'd now like to invite David to talk.
Thank you very much. Hello, my name is David, and I think this is a great campaign to put the people back into what you do as well and to give them a name. So my name is David, and please be gentle with me if you will. Well, thanks for turning up, which is great. That doesn't always happen when my name is on the agenda, so that's fantastic. I wanted also to say that thank you to Hospice to start with. Hospice UK came and pitched for us to be the charity strategic partner for us a little while ago. Last year, we were working with Bernardo's, and we then invited our employees to tell us who they wanted, perhaps as we looked ahead for the next couple of years. We got a short list, and we cut that down, and we ended up with 5 charities in the room. For us, for a number of us, there was a clear winner, but we still had to put that back to our employees, and there ended up an even clearer winner, and that is why I'm talking to you today, because Hospice UK understood our needs. So you looked at us like a client. You looked at us as though you needed to understand what it was we were looking to buy. What we wanted to buy was a charity that was aligned to our people. You did that. We're working with you for 2 years. We're raising tens of thousands of pounds. But most importantly to me as the Chief Sustainability Officer, you're inspiring and helping to inspire our people. So hospices across the UK are helping to inspire our people to volunteer, give of their time, understand hospice care a little bit better, and just feel a little bit more rewarded in their day and a little bit more connected to us as a company because we're in partnership. So that's part already of how it's working well. So for my little piece, I thought, I was asking how, should businesses give these fantastic lessons to hospice? Should hospices be more like businesses? And the problem I struggled with when I started to make some notes was that the implication is that business has all the answers, which of course we don't. Business has a lot of problems, has a lot of challenges, and in many cases gets things wrong. So in no way do I stand here in front of you as a businessman and say, we have the answers for you. If you were only more like us, how successful you would be. I don't believe that's the case. But I've got 5 points to make, and I wanted to just share a few things that hopefully will be helpful over the next 10 minutes or so. My 5 points would be, absolutely, hospices be like businesses, only where it helps. Pick the best bits of business and shamelessly steal them. What I would say is protect and recognize your existing strengths. You're already incredibly good at what you do. Celebrate it, don't apologize for it. Please do celebrate it with your people and do more of it. Do it more often, do it more consciously, and be that version of yourselves. I think we also have to recognize why charity spending is under scrutiny, and we have to deal with that, but not be apologetic for it. We have to just be realistic with ourselves and very grown up about what those reasons are and why that's the case. But we also had to ask ourselves, what can business learn from charity? And I'll give you a little bit of a thought on that and end with a plea to go and have a look at this, a piece of research that we did this year, including input from Hospice as well. It's free to download. You don't even have to give an email, which I know is quite often the price when you then get spammed for the rest of your life. But no, it's there for free to download. And this talks about that more equal partnership where business can learn just as much from charity. So back to my 5 points, only where it helps, pick the best. You might have, unless you come from the business world or you're already working in it originally or recently, you might have perceptions and views of what the business world is like. And they can be extreme negative images. We can be viewed as a very cold-hearted, ruthless existence solely to make people very rich. And that might be true for certain parts, but I can promise you it's not true at Carilion. We're not very rich at Carilion, and we struggle particularly hard just to make the money we do make. There can be perceptions as well of businesses being full of fat cats, and Dr. Liam Fox didn't do us any help by implying that we're all off to play golf on a Friday afternoon. I genuinely can't remember the last time I played golf. Were I any good at it? And my CEO has just landed this morning back from a ruthless, exhausting tour of North America, shoring up investors and talking to them about our plans and our strategies for the future, and living a UK day as well as a US day. So if he had any time for golf, I think he'd probably spend it with his family first. So it isn't that fat cat, relaxed, fun place to be. I walked here from the train station to save the cab fare, I promised you. I ate my packed lunch that I made last night and then got up this morning at 4:45 and took it from the fridge. So we don't live the high life, we really don't. Well, my version of business doesn't anyway. But I'm sustainability, so I'm here for the people, I'm here for the environment, I'm here for good business, okay? And I hope you believe that. So business is not necessarily what you read about in the press, in the same way that hospices are not necessarily what you know is written about you sometimes. But there are some realities. We are constantly under the microscope. We are constantly examined for what we are or may yet do. We're constantly under the microscope for what we may have done 14 years ago, There's an awful lot of pressure on us, just as much scrutiny on us. And there should be. But the bit that struggles, for me, particularly the thing I struggle with, is the media seem hell-bent on writing a negative story about everyone. I'm not to do the down on the media, because I know there are some great people that work in media. I used to work in media, as you know, having come from Sky as well. So the media has some really good people, but it also has a tendency to write about the negative parts. When I was in the Gulf War, I had some work and was doing some work with Ben Brown, and the phrase came out, "If it bleeds, it leads." Now, that's the way that the media were viewing defence at the time. They were looking for a negative story, but bear in mind we didn't have a UN mandate then. So the media is always going to pick up a negative angle. So I'm able to live with that. But the media don't pick up on the fact that Carilion has 512 people into work as a result of its work with the homeless, that we've created over 1,100 work placements, that we're raising money and working with you in hospice, that we've got people working all over the world in Canada and the Middle East. So however many positive stories that Claire and I can bring together from our sustainability teams, the stories that Jenny brings out of her communications efforts, we cast them sometimes into an empty room. So I think you have to be aware that the media images and the way that that puts the perception across can create some really negative images. It is utterly relentless, though. We're under the microscope and we're working hard. So, if that's true, and if you believe all that, what could we offer you that would be positive? Well, we can offer you things you already do in a way, but even more of it. That focused efficiency to deliver the core of what you do. Relentless pursuit of what you do. Yes, you do a good thing, but you should also view it, and I'm sure you do, as a relentless exchange of money, resource, and result. And that's what we do in the business world from what I've seen. We do retain the best talent, other than people like me, of course, but we do, it's a bit of a pro bono effort on Carilion's half, but we do retain the best talent and we pay the market rates for what they deliver for our company. We develop them and we invest in their development just as enough that we can to get that talent made even more successful and made even more relentlessly true, moving forward. And that sounds very cold-hearted, I know, but the fact is we're trying to convert resources into return for our shareholders. And that's really where we start to then bring that out. We are ready to market our story and not be apologetic about it. If we do well, we want to push that. If you're doing well, you should push it relentlessly, without apology, and without any sense of embarrassment that you've done well. And if you look back to what we're trying to do, the realities are that when we do well and return a profit, it tends to go to our shareholders. That's the majority of where it goes. It's about 5%. A few years ago, that would have been what you got on a decent bank account. Never at the moment, of course, but you could have got that from banks not so long ago. And the majority of our shareholders are pension funds. So when we do well, pension funds do well. So I think we just have to not be apologetic in a way that profit is a bad thing to do, and pick up what Dan was saying, that profit and return, and what Eamon was saying, your profit, your return is people being better cared for. And when I was looking at some of the facts and figures that you're looking at, you're touching the lives in a direct way, usually at their most stressed, of about 250,000 people at least every year. That's an awful lot of people to do a good thing for. So if you do it well and with more efficiency, you will be thanked for that. Maybe not in this life, but certainly you will be thanked for that by me, by a lot of people. You may never get the media recognition for it, but that will be the more business-like aspect, perhaps, of what you do. Okay, the other thing that we tend to do, and this is perhaps where the best comes out, we always tend to ask ourselves in a business case, if we're going to invest in something, where's the evidence? If we want to put this in, how will this work? What's the data? What supports it? Where's the study? Where's the research? If it's just a hunch, I won't get it past my chief exec. We won't get it past our major projects committee. We won't get that sort of investment to come through. So that idea of evidence-led conclusions that take effort, performance, and resource and lead to a reward is what we would perhaps offer as an idea of how we do business. But I also asked the question, the second point I think really was protect your strengths, because you are businesses already. You already have that ruthless focus on expenses. You have that protection of overhead, and perhaps that word overhead has got too many perceptions around it. You also have a clear product to deliver. You deliver it very well in a very professional way. And you measure and you manage and reward like most other businesses as well. So I think in some ways, you're not a million miles away, as I'm sure you would all agree, from businesses anyway. But you are in it together, and I think that's what makes hospice slightly different. Your collaboration will be your strength. Your collaboration is what sat in front of Carilion last summer and convinced us that you were the best strategic partner for us to work with. So actually, whilst you may all sit here and represent individual businesses, you really are one business, I hope you see yourselves as that, and you're far more powerful and you have far more reach than we ever would as a FTSE 250. So I think don't be apologetic about that. Bring that strength out. Use each other. Learn from each other. Support each other. Please eliminate duplication and any inefficiencies, any noise at the interfaces wherever you can to make it even more effective. Because it already is, and you're changing lives. But the one bit you have, which we seek in business, and I can never buy it, no matter how inspiring I be, I can never buy it. It's what I used to do in the military. It's discretionary effort. You have discretionary effort from your people, from your volunteers, from all of the people that swirl around your ecosystem. You have it, it's not for sale. They'll never sell it to you. I can never buy it. It's the 15% of someone's effort that doesn't matter how much money I pay them. They'll give it to me because they want to. Claire on my team here will do a little bit extra for me outside of her hours. They'll do a bit at a weekend because she wants to, because she thinks it matters. And your discretionary effort is the fundamental value of your ecosystem. And it's the fundamental pursuit of business. So it's one of your biggest strengths. It's already there. And I think you need to bring it out even more and recognize how valuable that is. So we talked about the third point, perhaps being why charity is under such scrutiny. And there's no doubt about it, as you're saying. You know, you've got stories like the kids company out there, which the media love to feast on. They love to feast on it when it goes wrong. They will rarely feast on or even cover, as we were saying, the things that your people are doing today. They did yesterday, and they will do tomorrow, and they will do 24/7 for the rest of this year to make people's lives just a little bit better at the toughest of times. So you are under scrutiny, and you will remain under it, but the realities are, I suppose, that's the same for business. The difference is, I think, you're using donations. You're using people's discretionary money they chose to give to you, and they have an expectation about how you'll use it. But I would come back to that point about pensioners as well. The realities are a lot of pensioners put a lot of expectation on a business that they will do the right thing by their pension funds. I am a pensioner myself, or will be at some stage. You know, I've got pension funds. I hope someone out there in business is doing the right thing for my pension, and I hope they're using that money well and getting the returns that are needed. But I would like to think they're doing it in the right way, in a sustainable, ethical way, and making the right sorts of investments. So I asked really what businesses could learn from charities, and I think I've sort of touched on it a little bit in that discretionary effort piece really as well there. I think the three things I would say we could learn from you, and again back to what I was saying, please protect your strengths, celebrate them and bring them even more strongly to the fore. The one thing you have, which we sometimes lack, is a sense of purpose. I'm working with a small company at the moment that's just a startup company. They're just desperately trying to make their way in the world, and they've got a model called the purposeful business. And they're trying to convince other businesses that actually, if you look at what voters said recently, if you look at what happened in Brexit, if you look at what happened in America, people are looking for a better purpose from their society. You already have it. Hospice UK and every one of your individual hospices has a purpose. You know why you're there. We don't always know that as business, and I think we could learn a little bit more about that sometimes. But you have it, you can celebrate it, you can bring it strongly to the fore. You also belong to a family. It might not feel like it when you've got mergers and different joint projects coming through, and you feel like you're fighting perhaps at the edges of your boundaries, but you are a family. I like to create that sense of family at Carilion, but we're not a family. We turn up because we're paid. And I think that's one of the big things we could learn about bringing that family more together. Because the essence of what you do as well is that you care for people. And when I was in the military, I felt cared for. I felt like I mattered. And in the three big blue chip companies I've been with since there have been days when actually it's been very difficult to feel cared for. And as a sensitive young man, of course, that really can be quite hard to give my discretionary effort. But you've got it, and I think you can teach us a lot about that. So just to finish off, I think I will just finish off with Partnerships of Equals and say this. This piece of work we did was a piece of independent primary research, which was designed to try to understand the gap that can exist between communities and between businesses. So a lot of what I've been saying here, hopefully offering something of use to consider, is that there is a difference. You can be more like business, and we can be more like charity. But the reality is there is a gap at the moment. And there's a gap in the fact that charities don't really understand how businesses work in a lot of cases, or what the business can do for them, or how to access that resource. And business doesn't really understand what charities need, or how best to offer some useful, valuable help. And hopefully in here, there's a few answers to that. There's a few bits and pieces of research, and there's a commitment from us at Carilion of what we're doing about that this year, next year, and really hopefully for the future of our strategy. So perhaps that brings us all the way back to the start of what I was saying, that in reality, perhaps it's not a question that should hospices be more like businesses, but hospices should understand business better. Shamelessly steal anything you like the look of that will help you care better for people. Use it. Don't be apologetic for the strengths you've already got. Celebrate the discretionary effort that's coming from your people, champion that, and accept that you're under scrutiny, we're all under scrutiny as best you can, but don't ever give up trying to sell your good messages. You will get there, hopefully, in the end. Good luck.
Thank you very much. Right, well, we've got about 10 minutes left, so I think we'll move straight to some questions. I'm sure you've got some burning questions to ask, so have I got any questions on the floor? Just over there? Do we have a mic? Yeah, thank you.
Hello, Tina Swanee, Chief Executive. My name is Tina, Chief Executive of Birmingham St Mary's Hospice. I did watch more of that Dan Pallotta film, and he talks about, he's critical of the mindset that criticises charities for spending money on what he calls the dirty word of overheads. And I wondered whether, as you mentioned, Eamon, sound bites, whether you could help me find a really good sound bite that might not only justify but enlighten stakeholders around the need to invest in overheads.
There will be a soundbite seminar following this in room 42. It's a good question, Tina. I think before you get to the soundbite, you've got to try and work out what the story is. And one of my mantras since joining St Anne's as the chief exec is that we, David alluded to it, we know what we do. We're very good at telling our patients and families and friends what we do, but we're not very good always at telling our story to other audiences, and we've got to get that right. We've got to be louder and prouder in the telling of the story, and when we've got a mechanism for doing that, we can then extrapolate some interesting sound bites. But you're right, overheads is a word that business people understand, not necessarily, the pensioner who gives £8 a month in the direct debit would necessarily understand that overheads include more than just a roof that needs retiling. So it's a very good point. I think the starting position, though, is try and formulate in succinct ways what the actual story is that we want the wider world to know. And this phrase that you've just mentioned there, David, is great. I've written that down. That's going in my next speech. The discretionary effort, which is fundamental to our existence. I suppose, like us, you've got 2/3 of your income coming from discretionary effort, discretionary fundraising, and a little bit from the CCGs. So if we can all, perhaps we can use Hospice IQ or other mechanisms to put all our proposed sound bites on it and pick out the best ones. But it starts with being bold to tell our story, I think, Tina.
One thing I noticed when I moved into this sector from the business sector is we always talk about cost, the cost of everything, and in business we talk about investment. And I think maybe there's just a language piece as well that we need to appreciate, that we are investing in our businesses. And it's not just, the overheads aren't just a cost, it's part of the investment. Any other questions?
Hi, hello. I'm Sally Garbutt at St Christopher's Hospice. I have a role in education, and it's a comment as much as a question and an unashamed plug, possibly. You mentioned Hospice IQ, and there's a couple of points I picked up on from both of you. You talked about concerted agitation, Eamon. My boss calls it making myself deeply unpopular. And I think with an evidence base, which requires us promoting what we do well, we've managed to get to the table of apprenticeship reform and the new nurse reforms, and that's a collaborative approach through an education collaborative. So that's one side. But the other thing is, what I've noticed is education is a great thing that we do very well, but we often don't ask to be paid for it. But when we're asked, people will pay. Often not the first time or the second time, but they do pay. And sometimes colleges will tell us they can't pay us for things that they can. And we just need to keep going back and asking them. So you know, anybody that's delivering education here with partners on any of the publicly funded programs like apprenticeships, if you are not getting money for it, for your time, will you please contact me through the NHEC website, which is on the St Christopher's website. We need to start asking for payment for the excellent education we provide.
Thank you, excellent point. Did you want to?
No, I was going to give a soundbite actually for overheads, to be fair. If you manage it a little bit better than your competition, was what we found. Your competition is other charities. I think you're in competition for the discretionary pound, particularly. So I think it doesn't matter how much they are, but if you demonstrate how you're managing it better, if you demonstrate the return it is giving for your hospices, I think that's all you really need to know. I think if you can put that message across, that it doesn't matter what you're spending on that, then the reality is it's the return we need to focus on, I think.
Can I just respond to Sally,
absolutely.
please? I think the world of education that we inhabit as well is a good example of how we all can and do collaborate. And in our hospice, we do charge. We don't always get what we want or get anything, but you know, it's a stream of income generation. But within our hospice movement, I think the education is something that, you know, many of us will say we have collaborated with each other on. It just can't be done in isolation, can it? Yeah, we all do face new tasks, and it comes back to the same old thing. Let's share best practice and share intelligence and use examples such as Sally's to help each other out.
I think the other thing I would say on the education point is you say that the better educated, the better people are understanding that. You know, that's the real essence of it. And I think back to the point I was making, with about 1/3 people in your sphere of influence, your education requirement is huge, absolutely enormous. But the better educated all of those people are, for every one of them that understands it better, if they share it with 3, you'll have a virally positive effect. And I think it's that effect you're looking for through that. There's a direct aspect, but the indirect is huge, isn't it?
Thanks. I think we've got time for another couple of questions. Over there.
Hi, my name's Imelda. Great discussion. Really, really enjoyed it. I think one of the big points really is the whole issue around risk. Charities taking risks. I think we have to take risks, and what are they going to look like and how people respond to that. We've taken a risk quite recently around a big fundraising campaign that I won't go into today. I'm talking about it tomorrow. But the impact that it has, not necessarily with our general public, but it's how would you suggest we manage volunteer expectation? Because so often we can take those risks, but we know that our volunteers are the biggest numbers behind our organisation, and the impact and their response to our risk sometimes is a risk in itself.
Thanks. David?
Yeah, absolutely. If I can just say, that for example, at Carilion, volunteering is the essence of what we mean by community engagement, but we really struggle with our people. We really do. We're doing some work at the moment where they've just told us they don't understand exactly what it is we're asking them to do. So the volunteer expectation, as you say, not just in the hospices, but in companies as well, and so on. If you're asking, or if somebody is offering to volunteer, they're going to give you something, of course, for free, aren't they, that's valuable to them, which is their time. And I think setting up that expectation in advance is probably as much as about understanding what they expect to get from it as well, because it can also feel like a bit of a one-way relationship, I think, sometimes, you know, that they will come along, they will do this, and they'll go away again. We were talking about a voluntary piece that we're doing with St Anne's, and one of the big powers of that piece of volunteering is that there's something to see at the end of it. There's something to take away at the end of it. There's something to share a picture of or a story about with the people that you go away with. Back to our point about sharing this and the indirect impact you can have. I think the point about volunteering is that it's like a good meal or like a fantastic tasty drink. You know, the better taste you've got after you've done it, and the more you reflect on it and think, you know, that was really worth doing. I think that's really what it will be. So my advice would be to unpick perhaps some of those expectations and probably accept that everyone coming to the volunteering table will be different, actually. They may have different expectations and even some fear. And I think that was one of the things we took away from this, is that you have to equip people in advance to feel confident and comfortable with what they will do as a volunteer, because some of them can be really quite fearful of what they would encounter during that experience.
Eamon.
And I think we love our volunteers. We've got almost 800 altogether. They're amazing. We couldn't live without them. But some of them do think they run the organisation, obviously. Some of them might run it better than me, I'm not sure. I agree wholeheartedly with David's comments. It's about managing the expectations of the beneficial outcome of change that the risk will end up in. And, you know, if you've got volunteers, as we all have probably, who've been in that position for 30 years or 35, 25 years, for a long, long time, quite often they're the ones who you've got to bring along with you. But I keep coming back to this. It's about telling the story. And the more of the story you can tell, the more you can emphasise the potential benefits at the end of this change process versus we're taking a risk. The better it is. And, you know, it's fairly obvious, really, but volunteers as a body are tricky. I get that. But Imelda, you've obviously... Oh, you're from Ireland? Yeah, well, I'll just turn on the charm.
I think we can squeeze in one more quick one. In the front there, Ali.
Catherine.
Oh, okay. Do you want to
hello, my name is David Houston. I'm from Trinity Hospice.
Oh, good.
If you want your groceries delivered, come over to me. Yes, I'm really interested in what we can learn from you guys around entrepreneurship and innovation. It's probably my greatest fear, but hopefully also a myth, that we are less entrepreneurial and innovative today than we were perhaps 20 years ago, and less so potentially than some of the possible new entrants that might enter the market. So, yeah, very interested to see what we can learn from you guys on how to fail fast to succeed. Thanks.
Yeah, I was going to say that, but my first point, I think, is that when you embark on any kind of ambition to be innovative, you have to be ready to fail. I have a piece of work we do with our future leaders, which I do with them, and explain the difference between theory Y cultures and theory X culture. So the idea of a high control, you mustn't fail, you have to absolutely have a process that governs everything. Theory X culture. Theory Y culture, try things with the right intent and see where it takes you. So I think there's a little bit of cultural work to do up front to start with. The second point we're learning is that innovation does not equal technology. I think it's almost always defaulted to the idea you've got to just introduce some technology and that is innovation. But of course, what we're trying to do is to accept that it's a process. Innovation is a process of thought. You know, it can be just about using everything you already have. And in fact, innovation can cost nothing. That's the final point to step away from, I think, really, is that the point about innovation is what will it change for the better for the people who are seeking to benefit. So for the people you are caring for, what in that innovation will deliver something that's better for them. So be ready to fail. It does not equal technology, and think about what benefit it will deliver.
I think it also refers, David, to how I finished instilling bold ambition into the DNA, because you can, you know, to have ambition, you've got to be innovative, in my view. They're not mutually exclusive, of course, but one really doesn't work without the other. And innovation can, as David just said, it's not changing the world. It could be as simple as, and I know actually I'm putting back to you what your idea, because we discussed it last night. David's idea, one of his many brilliant ideas, is that when you look around this room, or when you look around the people in Lancashire, or in the southwest, or in our case, Greater Manchester, we are awash with amazing talent, not just people who can look after patients in a difficult time, not just palliative and end-of-life care experts. We're awash with talents, partly because of the way we all came to the hospice and the lives that we've had before the job we're doing now. So innovation can be gathering experts together from every pod, but sharing the expertise. So not everybody needs to have the best media expert in their hospice. Not everybody has to have the best educator in their hospice. We can share it. And to me, that would be a very tangible and easily achieved innovation.
And that's a brilliant note to end on. Sadly, we've run out of time, but please join me in just thanking our brilliant speakers this afternoon.